Let's kick it off.
Thank you, Leo. Thank you, everyone, being here. Welcome. Welcome, everyone, to today's TIC Council webinar on critical challenges in carbon capture, utilization, and storage. Thank you for joining us today. We're excited for the discussion we are starting to have. For your information, I will be utilizing the acronym TIC throughout this webinar. It means testing, inspection, and certification. As a general introduction, we at TIC Council represent the independent TIC industry. Our mission is to advocate for and promote effective solutions that will protect the public, support innovation, and uphold best practices in safety, quality ethics, and key for today's discussion, sustainability. This webinar stems for a key question our association and members have been reflecting on. How can we, TIC industry, ensure that emerging decarbonization solutions genuinely contribute to a transparent, reliable, and robust energy transition? CCS and CCU are now dynamic industries experiencing significant momentum for rapid growth. However, the TIC industry is not always identified as the primary partner in this emerging decarbonization solution, but we are not to be bypassed. The TIC industry is an integral partner that must be embedded throughout the CCS-CCU value chain. Our technical know-how, global presence, and commitment to impartiality make us uniquely qualified to safeguard these technologies and build trust with all our stakeholders. Today, around the table, we will have three members of these stakeholders that we are generally dealing with, and I will present them. We have Fabrice Del Corso, who is an expert in gas production and energy with Air Liquide. Fabrice, you are a senior expert specialized in industrial gas production processes and technology, with a career spanning over 3 decades. You're actively contributing to the professional community as a representative of Air Liquide on the board of Club CO2, France's leading association promoting carbon capture, utilization, and storage. Olave Heuillet, Senior Advisor for Climate and Industry at Bellona. Olave, you coordinate Bellona's policy and advocacy work with industry decarbonization in the Nordic countries. Your responsibilities include technology options, funding schemes, and policy framework. Fabien Ramos, you are carbon removal lead for the European Commission, and you are working at the European Commission in the Directorate General to Climate Action. You are now working on the development of an EU regulatory framework to the certification of carbon removal. Last but not least, I am Muriel Pocachard, working at Bureau Veritas as Global Technical Lead for CCS and CCU. I am representing the TIC Council, and I'll be the moderator for the discussion that we will have today. I have 25 years experience in the oil and gas industry as a corrosion and asset integrity management engineer. I have spent my career accompanying process plant operators in managing their asset integrity with the objective of improving their operation excellence for sure decreasing risk of unacceptable risk of failure. In pursuit of answering all the questions I have raised as an introduction, the Council produced a white paper outlining the role of the independent TIC industry in the CCS-CCU value chain. It explores how we have helped addressing key challenges and how we want to help address the key challenges this technology faces, such as project financing, ensuring mechanical integrity, regulatory gaps, and mitigating the risk of greenwashing. Today's webinar is the next step in this initiative, a platform for direct dialogue with key stakeholders in the CCS-CCU value chain. Today, together, we will examine different perspectives, challenges, and visions from those around this virtual table. Before we dive into the discussion, a quick note on today's structure. We have prepared 4 key topics to explore in individual rounds. First topic will be on project financing. Then we will explore the regulatory compliance. Then we will speak about transparency and sustainability. And lastly, long-term efficiency of the CCS-CCU industry. Each topic will be briefly introduced before we pose questions to the three speakers that are with me today. We encourage our audience to share questions in the chat at any time. Time permitting, we'll address them at the end of each discussion round or during the final Q&A session. To start the discussion, and because this is a very large topic, in order to break the ice, I would like to start with a quick roundtable question. Can you give me, in 3 words, what are your challenges? So let's start with you, Olaf, from Bellona. So can you give me, in 3 keywords, what are your challenges as an association to accompany the correct development of this industry?
Thank you for inviting me to this webinar. I think in a few very brief words, main challenges are to CCS deployment in Europe, which is the region I know the best. Is that one, it is cheaper to emit carbon dioxide than it is to capture or store it, or to use other technologies to mitigate emissions from a heavy industry. Secondly, there's lack of funding to close this gap between, for example, the carbon price and the actual cost of carbon capture and storage or other technologies. And third, there is lack of infrastructure for companies that actually want to apply this technology, because this is not something that a company, an emitter like a cement plant or a steel plant can use on its own. They will need someone else to deal with the transport and the storage of carbon dioxide. This is a major challenge.
Okay, thank you. This is a very interesting starting point. And what about you, Fabien? In 3 words.
Good morning. Good afternoon, sorry, and thank you for your invitation for this meeting, for this workshop. From my side, I will say, yes, I fully agree that infrastructure is one of the key aspects. We need to develop in Europe the infrastructure to capture, to transport, to store, to reuse the CO2. And we see it as an essential element, an essential challenge we have ahead of us. Today, CCUS projects are very limited in numbers in Europe, and we know that we need many of them in the future. So we need to recognize their climate benefit better, probably, in our regulatory framework.
Thank you very much, Fabien. And for you, Fabrice?
Hello, and hello, Muriel. Hello, all. Thanks for inviting me, and thanks for the organization. I would say a bit the same thing. I would say that infrastructure, yes, but I will put a little bit of emphasis on the storage infrastructure, because to make it simple, everything starts with the storage. If you don't have storage, you can't do anything. Once you have a storage, I would say all the transportation and capture is, for me, more easy to implement. But that's one point. And of course, the funding, we will come back later on that, but there are, I would say, 2-3 aspects we can detail on the funding, but I keep it for the next chapter.
Thank you. You are very nice, because you offer me a very nice transition to the first question. Because the first question I would like to address with you is about the project financing. When we have worked on the development of our white paper, we have identified that TIC industry can be a partner for accompanying the project financing. Why? Because we offer de-risking. We can accompany the process of the permitting. We can support the assessment of a project viability. We are quite well known for the quantification of carbon removal, the mitigation of non-compliance. And once the project is on track, we can still refine the de-risking. And once the project is under operation, we are trusted and independent partner for on-site monitoring and verification process. That being said, the project financing, as the 3 of you mentioned, is a key pillar for anything to be started. So let's ask you first, Fabien, what policies and funding models do you think would make CCUS project more attractive to private investors?
Thank you very much for this question. First of all, I would like to say that, well, in Europe, we have already some instrument to try to fund some of the project. And I think when we are talking about CCUS project, we should acknowledge the diversity of the project, and in particular in terms of maturity of the project. CCS, CCUS are technologies relatively recent. Okay, we are talking about CCS for more than 20 years probably, but in particular CCU, there was quite some development recently on CCU that we didn't have 10 years ago. That means that not all the projects are at the same level of maturity, and we need to look at what stage of development they are. And in Europe, we have different policies for that. We are looking through the Horizon Europe project at really very low TRL projects, 1 to 5, 6, where we fund research, we fund very early innovation, and we try through the use of grants in particular to support these aspects that are of course essential to develop the technologies. Then we have the projects that are a little bit more advanced, and for that, the projects that are not really fully mature from a commercial perspective or market perspective, but are already well advanced. We know that everything is working, and it's more a matter of making it really ready for doing a business out of it. And for that, we have some revenues from the emission trading scheme in Europe that are used to support this project through the Innovation Fund. And when you look at the results of different calls of the Innovation Fund, you can see that I think the largest share of the money invested through the Innovation Fund goes to some projects that have at least one of the 3 components of the CCUS value chain, meaning either a capture component of CO2, a transport component, or a storage component. But this is not enough, of course. In the future, well, and there is also source of finance. There is the common infrastructure, the safe possibilities to finance that. So common European framework for developing this kind of activities. And but we need to do more on that. And what we need to look at is also solutions to leverage private funding with public funding. How best using our money to support the investment of the private sector in these technologies. But for the private sector in the technologies to have a motivation to invest in these technologies, they need a reason for that. And I think another key challenge is to have a real recognition from the regulatory perspective of the benefit of this solution. Some of them are well recognized. For instance, in the ETS, the CCS is well recognized. If you capture the emissions from an industry and you store it permanently and you prove that you are doing that, then you do not need to surrender allowances in the ETF, things that you will have to do if you don't capture the emissions. But for other type of CCUS activities, I'm talking in particular about CCU, I'm talking in particular about carbon removals, where the CO2 is not coming from a fossil sources, but more from biogenic sources, combustion of biomass, for instance. There is not a full recognition of the advantage of these solutions today. And we need to look at towards 2030 and after 2030, the framework post 2030 to improve the situation. Why I'm saying 2030 is because the framework for achieving the 2030 climate objective in Europe is quite clear, and it has to be achieved only through emission reduction. So no carbon removals necessarily. And also the approach for CCU is very specific and yet not very well developed. But post 2030, if we really want to scale up these solutions, it will be essential to have these elements in place.
Thank you, Fabien. You have been able to say in a very small amount of time a lot of things. You have spoken about private and public financing, funding, ETS, etc., all the mechanisms that would support the development of the project. For you, Fabrice, I have another question which is related. What are the primary challenges your company faces in securing funding for CCU, CCS projects, and how do you overcome them?
Well, I will talk very fast about CCU because, well, for us and for some companies like us, CCU is a reality for more than 50 years. I remind it, there are new applications foreseen for CO2, but first, CCU was here before any CCS. It's 300 million ton per year, which is traded and produced or consumed in the world. So it's one of the most important market for a chemical today. But there are new applications and they are interesting, but we probably come back in another question. So for CCS, which is, let's say, dedicated to climate challenges, I would say for me, and as said Olaf, I wouldn't say there is the big challenge for is not. It is a little bit the price, the difference of revenue or price you have to pay between emitting directly the CO2 or storing it, of course, but I would say it's more the uncertainty which is related to the evolution of the price of the CO2. Meaning that for a CCS chain, we have to invest billions of euros. So, okay, not only us, but all the actors in the chain. And we have to rely on a market which is volatile and uncertain. So I would say, to make it positive, despite all the nice European funding mechanisms which Fabien mentioned, Innovation Fund, CEF, etc., today funding gap has been achieved on some projects, and one of them was in Netherlands, where there was in place a mechanism to manage this uncertainty of the price of carbon, which was a carbon contract for difference. So I don't know it's the solution. I would say the main issue is to manage this uncertainty between this amount of investment and this uncertainty on the price of carbon. And second point is also the insurance system, meaning that if we have any failure of one of the actor once the CCS chain is under exploitation, how do we manage to insure the risk for all the actors? We don't have any public or private mechanism of insurance which are today in place, to my knowledge, to manage this.
Very interesting. So what you are mentioning is that there are different partners in a project, but they have no contractual link. And if one is as a default, it can make the whole chain collapse.
Yeah, actually, we have contractual links, but there is a global way to insure the risk at a global level, which cannot covered by one single partner. You can cover part of your responsibility you take, but you cannot cover the liabilities for all the chain. And when you discuss with your other partners, today we didn't find the way to manage this.
Okay, thank you very much. Olaf, you are dealing with large type of industries when you are discussing with them. On the specific case of small and medium-sized company in the CCS CCU space, how can industry association help bridge the funding gap? We cannot hear you.
You're in mute, Olaf.
Very good. So to explain, we are a non-governmental organization. It's been active since 1996. Work with campaigning, with analysis and advocacy, and we have had lots of conversations over the last 30 years with various members of various industries regarding carbon capture and storage and other climate mitigation technologies. And so even though the technology exists, it can and needs to be modified, to be mass produced, to be modularized in order to bring costs down and get economies of scale. But the technology is there. The infrastructure is costly, big capital intensive, but it's also relatively some would say modest cost per ton of CO2 mitigated. I think this is the important thing for us. It's multi-million, sometimes several hundred millions of euros in investment for a single capture plant, even more for a CO2 storage site. But per ton of CO2 avoided, we're talking about maybe between 50 euros, 100 euros, sometimes 150 or 200 euros per ton of CO2. And that's competitive, or that's an acceptable price to pay compared with many other technologies. And it's necessary for us to get to zero emissions, or net zero. So, and parts of this, of the funding sources that have been available, that have been mentioned already by Fabien, grants from the European Commission, the European Union, national grants are there. But also think getting customers to pay for this is, I think, the next big frontier, the next big challenge in carbon capture and storage. For example, a big cement plant in Norway now is developing a CO2 capture plant. It will be operating by the end of this, by this summer, if everything goes according to plan. It's mostly funded by the Norwegian state, with some private funding as well. But the next challenge for them is to get this product, the CCS cement and CCS concrete, into the market and to get customers to pay for it. And that means that the cost of installing carbon capture and storage will need to trickle down all the way to the consumer at the end, by way of construction companies, concrete producers, and those, in the end, those who are going to pay for this. Often public companies, but also private companies that are building houses, roads, tunnels, bridges, etc. And for the final consumer, the price of CCS might only increase the cost by a couple of %, even though the price of cement might double if you install carbon capture and storage. And both explaining this, explaining the carbon footprint of a building, how much it can go down and what it's going to cost, I think is a challenge for everyone across the value chain. And for that, we need not only technology providers, but also the various parts of the value chain to incorporate the cost of CCS to in the end make me and everyone else who buys and uses concrete, steel, chemicals, ammonia to pay for the pay not only for the cost of the product, but for the cost of reducing the emissions of this product. It's possible, but it's well, pedagogical challenge, but also can be difficult to explain. And I think when it comes to life cycle analysis and comparing CCS with others or other alternative materials such as wood in construction, I think companies that work with standards and with verification have a big role to play in analyzing and providing transparency about the life cycle analysis of the carbon footprint and the energy footprint of all processes related to CCS and to CCU.
Okay, thank you very much. So as far as I can see, there are several tools in place in Europe. We need to explore the rest of the world in order to compare. There might be lots of solutions to finance the development of the projects. This is already occurring. There might be a question mark about the competition from the rest of the world, but I will not open this door now because otherwise we will speak for hours, and this is not the aim today, except if everyone wants to stay longer, but I don't think so. So this is a very convenient answers that you have all provided because they are very complementary. Leo, on your side, do you have any question? No question raised. So the audience, if you have any question on the topic, please do not hesitate to put them in the chat. If none at this moment, I will pursue the discussion with the second topic of the day, which is the regulatory compliance. Because we have spoken about funding, and for funding to be provided, there is a need to demonstrate that there is a viability, that the project has been demonstrated viable, and that it is responding to regulatory compliance environment. And this is an hurdle that we have identified to complement and to be associated to financing when we have written our white paper. The regulatory context is something that needs to be discussed today. CCS and CCU have been qualified as acceptable paths for reduction of emission in addition to the shift from fossil to renewable energy. Regulation and policies are under construction and popping up worldwide. We have all the work done by the ISO working group on CCS, CCU, but also all the others that are refreshing standards and completing set of internationally recognized practices. Local regulatory bodies are developing frameworks. We have already spoken about Europe, but we can also mention the specific renewable directive. We have the Inflation Reduction Act in the US. We have some definition of clean molecules in Japan and Korea that appears, etc. So there are already international actions that are there to support the development. Normalization is also undertaken. Operators are setting their requirements. However, projects are being initiated in a quite uncertain condition that we, TIC industry, can support. We can accompany to perform regulatory watch, advocating to the different parties that are involved in the reality of project development. We can also develop our own standard certification scheme before regulation is formalized. And for sure, we can support in performing gap assessment. TIC industry is the key partner to accompany setting compliance standard and ensuring relevant level of quality is achieved. But for sure, before a company is coming to us, or they are coming to us, and generally speaking, their first question is, can you help me understand how I can justify the investment? So it is generally speaking a question of money linked to the financing, but not only. There is also a question of de-risking and how they can start or how they can progress. Fabrice, in this context, what protocols does your company follow internally to ensure safety and quality without clear regulatory guidance?
Okay, I would say that for me, there are a lot of clear regulatory guidance already because, as I said before, CO2 is captured, transported, and used since decades at a rather high level throughout the world. So what is different is when we go to CCS, all the capture, transport, purification units will have to make a scale up of size by, let's say, a factor of 10. But all the regulations and technical measures are already applied for the CO2 current market. That's the first point. What is new in the CCS is the storage. And well, unfortunately, this is a part I know not very well. So I rely on the regulators and on the companies who are promoting this kind of wells to have a proper, let's say, regulations and control on this part. After, there is the link between the CCS, so all the CO2, let's say, accounting, and the CO2 accounting we do on the CCS and the ETS. So I think the metering and the way to count the emissions when we have a CCS chain is something which is okay. We find way to do it, but it's probably something to work on from my point of view. And well, last but not least, I think there is, as you mentioned, there's the question of the quality. So today for the market for use of CO2, we have very precise qualities to follow depending on the countries and the type of market we serve. But for the storage, there are several different specifications. So the work on normalization on this point should bring value to the whole to all the actors of this of the CCS and CCU probably.
Okay, thank you, Fabrice. So you are providing element that we always forget is that CO2 is not a new molecule and that it has been used for decades in different industries. But still, the regulation is under development and lots of things are getting clearer. Olaf, what are the most pressing regulatory gaps that could impact the deployment of the CCS CCU project, according to your point of view?
I think it has already been mentioned, the sort of that the transport of CO2 is nothing. It's nothing new. Storage of CO2 is also nothing new, even though they've done it a lot more in the United States than they have done in Europe, than we have done in Europe. But I think I want to emphasize the need for transparency. So from an NGO perspective, we want solutions to work, and we want as much transparency about the technologies, about the energy needs, about carbon goes in, carbon goes out, where does it come from, where does it go. It's necessary for us, but also I think for the public to have confidence and trust in not only the technology as such, but also for them to trust that public money should be prioritized for this type of for this technology. We believe that, but not all NGOs in Europe and not everyone in Europe believes that carbon capture and storage is a necessary or a reliable solution. And our answer to that is that it has been both carbon capture, transport, and storage has been in operation for several decades in countries around the world. But now that we want it to be used in new sectors, we want a lot more transport and storage of CO2. We think it's necessary for companies to provide information about how much carbon is emitted, how much is stored. To take an example, the longest operating CO2 storage site in Europe, which is the Sleipner Formation, which is CO2 comes from Equinor's gas processing in North Sea. It has been, as I said, operating for almost 30 years now. And it's possible, it's not that difficult to measure how much CO2 is put down there. But every now and then, in particular for the last couple of years, there have been stories about underreporting, not entirely correct reporting from Equinor's side, or not entirely transparent reporting of how much is captured and stored. And sometimes there's a good reason for that. There might be that the field is producing less gas, and therefore less CO2 is captured and stored than the technical capacity of the capture plant. But it's important that the public gets to know this and understand this, so that we don't only see claims of, for example, a capture site has the capacity to capture 1 million ton per year, but then we discover that, oh, maybe it only captures 600,000 or 400,000. Maybe there's a reason for it, but we need to understand why. And I think this is also where various forms of verification, independent verification, and transparency is necessary to create trust in a technology that we mostly know from offshore gas processing, and for capture and storage in products, and for mineral water, for beer, and for other products. It's a whole long range of new industries that will apply it now, and many of them have gotten, many of them will receive public funding, and then we need to know how efficient the system is working.
Okay, thank you. So just something comes to my mind, because you insisted on the transparency. So this is not only a question of regulation to be developed, but of public perception, education of the public, and the transparency between the operators in a certain manner and the people that are around the installation that would be utilized in a certain manner.
Yes, I think it's for those who work with this every day. I think carbon capture and storage it's nothing new. It's nothing it's not that complicated, even though it's big investments, big projects, lots of logistics that need to be in place, and of course also lots of safety measures, in particular when you're dealing with carbon dioxide near areas where there are people living or people working. But to have as much understanding as possible, I think it's necessary for companies to be more proactive in providing information about how this is working. And I think the good thing is that there are more capture, transport, and storage projects popping up now in Norway, in Denmark, in the Netherlands, and even in Germany, where carbon capture and storage was more or less taboo until a few years ago, at least in the broad public debate on climate and industry in Germany. So I think when we have a project, it's going to be a lot easier to know how they're working, and that also calls for quite a lot of transparency, in particular from those emitters who have received hundreds of millions in euros to decarbonize their production.
Thank you for that clarification. Fabien, what specific regulatory frameworks currently govern CCS and CCU projects? And what are the existing gaps that needs to be addressed? So what is your roadmap in a certain manner?
Already many things have been said. How I could complement this is, yeah, we need to look at maybe different pieces of the CO2 value chain, sorry. And for some parts of it, we have already a quite robust regulatory framework, and others maybe we could try to develop it a bit better. So if I have to provide an overview of what we have currently in Europe, in terms of storage, we have the CCS directive that is trying to provide some legal requirements on how to handle a storage installation for the storage of CO2 in terms of safetiness and in terms of being sure that the emissions are not released, or if they are released, there is a liability mechanism in place to ensure that there is someone that has to account for this release and somehow pay for this release, and ensure, most importantly, that the potential leakage is stopped and measures are put in place to solve it. So we have the CCS directive for that in Europe, and this is something on which we want to build in the future. There was not so many CCS permit emitted because simply a lack of project, but now it's coming. And when it's about storage, I think so Olaf already mentioned the storage that is going on, I think, for decades. Don't tell me if I'm wrong, but I think it's storing about 1 million tons of CO2 annually for quite some time now. But we have also the type of storage. The Horizon Europe was a predecessor of Horizon Europe, has funded a project called CarbFix that now is storing CO2 in Iceland directly in basalt through mineralization process. So just to say that we have also to adapt to different type of storage, the classical injection storage, potentially other approaches, and we have to make sure that our regulatory framework is evolving according to the development in technologies. Then, of course, a CCS installation is an ETS installation if it's large enough. And when we talk about ETS, we are talking about the transport of CO2, we are talking about capture of CO2, and the key legislation for that is the monitoring and reporting legislation that put a strict rule on how to measure the emissions, but also, to make sure that there is not that everything is done correctly when it's about accounting what is not emitted because transported through pipelines or other means now for storage. So the monitoring reporting regulation is very important, and recently there was some update on that for about the transport of CO2, but also about what we call permanent CCU. So before in the ETS, the long-term storage of CO2 through mineralization in concrete, for instance, was not under the ETS, and now it is under the ETS, and the monitoring reporting regulation will have to deal with that as well. We have also developed a certification framework for carbon removal, where it's looking at a more life cycle assessment approach to really check that when a company claims some carbon removal, it's really a climate benefit for a climate benefit, and then there is a really net removal from the atmosphere, and not that there is more emission generated, for instance, to supply the energy required for a direct capture plant or things like that. So there is a framework there as well that is building, as I said, on the CCS directive, on the monitoring reporting regulation in Europe, where we look also at this life cycle aspects. What I want to say also, when it's not only about emissions, but it's about CO2 as a commodity that is transported. And there, I think we have some development. We need to do something. In particular, when we will have in the future a cross-border infrastructure that will capture the CO2 in one member state, cross the border for the transportation of several member states, and end up, for instance, in the North Sea, we have to make sure that when this economy of the CCUS economy is well developed and the CO2 can be used for very different purposes, being CCU, being CCS, and there is a common understanding on for instance, the purity of the CO2. And we need to, if we really want to have a single market for CO2 in Europe in the future, we need to start to look at the regulatory package for the transport and the infrastructure of CO2. And this is what our colleagues in particular for DG Energy are looking at. So to have common measure that will help everything. First, I think it's important to set quite early in the development of all this CCUS value chain, this kind of regulatory package, because then it avoids to have different standards evolving in different direction. And if we come too late with this regulation, it will be an additional burden to transform all that has been done previously in this common legislative standard. So regulatory standard. So that's an important element, and we also think that it will favor competitive approaches across different projects and avoid too much more of a monopoly, for instance. And the last point I would like to mention is the work done at international level, at the level of IPCC, because also a key aspect for the uptake of this project, the development of this CCUS project, is a well recognition of this project in achieving the climate objective of different countries and to achieve the ultimate objective of the Paris Agreement in keeping our temperature below 2 degrees. And for that, how we look at that, we look at inventories. And today, not all CCUS elements are reported in national inventories. And there is currently a work of the IPCC to provide guidance on how to report all types of CCUS emissions. And soon, I think in February, they will discuss the outline of this future report that should be published in 2027 and propose solutions on how to report all these emissions and carbon removals involved in the CCU value chain. And the last point I would like to say is a few words about the ETS, because in terms of generating a demand for this kind of project, I think the ETS has an essential role to play. I fully agree with Fabrice that there is some CCU happening, and for in agriculture sector to produce urea, or in the food sector for beverage, etc. There is some amount of CCU, but when we look at it from a European perspective on to help a CCU as a solution to help us to reach climate neutrality, we are talking to about an order of magnitude a little bit different, much larger scale of CCU, in particular for the production, potentially for the production of e-fuels, for instance, for the production of chemicals in the future of plastic, etc., etc., and in the construction sector also to enhance the carbonation of the concrete and this kind of things. And for that, yeah, the package I mentioned on the purity of the CO2 is very important. But as I said several times today, we also need to recognize the climate benefit of this. What does it mean? Today in the ETS, if you do just CCS, it's recognized by the ETS. If you consume biomass, it's also recognized as a neutral approach in terms of emissions. But the carbon removal are not very well recognized by the ETS. And we need, when you combine both, and we need to look at that very closely. And for CCU, it's the same. If you generate, if you produce chemicals through a CCU approach, that you capture the CO2 and you use the CO2 as a feedstock to produce your chemical, ethylene, methanol, or whatever you are going to do, and that needs carbon, you will have to surrender analysis at the time where you capture the CO2. And I think this is the kind of things that we need to fix, because if you do exactly the same thing with fossil carbon instead of CO2 carbon, you don't have to surrender analysis. So we are aware about that. We got a lot of feedback for stakeholders, for the chemical industry on this, that we need to fix that, and we'll work on this very soon now.
So thank you for this very exhaustive response, and we see that this is a huge work that has been accomplished and that will be accomplished in the future. I will have to speed a little bit because we have 40 minutes before the end of the webinar, and I will address only the third question, and I will ask you to be as brief as possible. The third question is around the transparency and sustainability. This is the hot topic. You have already mentioned several things. How to ensure a CCS and CCU project is sustainable and provide positive carbon reduction, being transparent, meet the high-level standard, being in position to provide independent and trustable support to confirm no greenwashing is happening. TIC industry has lots of tools. You have already mentioned some of them. Through the calculation of carbon footprint, the support to accounting, certification, life cycle assessment, the impact environmental studies, etc. So we are a trusted partner to also accompany this transparency and demonstration of sustainability. Fabrice. How does your company verify the authenticity and impact of its CCUS initiative to prevent greenwashing?
Okay. I would say that, so I will make the distinction between CCU and CCS2 in this, because for me, as for both, we are in the field of process industry, so we have rather centralized production processes and infrastructure. So I would say the control is something we can pretty well trust globally compared to other sectors when you have to justify that if you plant trees, okay, they will grow up, etc. So in this case, we know how to measure gases for natural gas, for CO2, etc. It's an environment which is, I would say, rather easy to measure. For CCS, yes, it's a rather life cycle assessment is rather pretty easy to do if we control all the leaks and if we control what we use. The benefit of the global benefit of the chain is for us not an issue if you control well the energy you put at the capture plant and in the rest of the chain if it's low carbon energy. And if you control the leaks, it's something we are pretty confident on. For CCU, it's a bit different because for me, historically, and it's still the case, I think CCU is more driven by the need of a product, whatever product you make, rather than climate issues. And I think for the new applications, which have been mentioned by Fabien, and I completely agree with what he says. The perspective of applications for new applications of CO2 are much higher than the current CO2 applications. But the impact on the climate is, for me, more difficult to assess and to ensure than in CCS. And I think we are pretty online also with what we saw and what Fabien mentioned also on the evolution of the ETS and MRR, where you really consider applications for concrete and construction materials, which can really, let's say, remove CO2 for a long term from the atmosphere. So this makes really sense to put it in that way. For the other applications, for me, it's something, let's say, I don't know if we will be able to assess really the real impact on the climate on this application, on the other applications.
Thank you. Fabien, what policies or regulation are in place to ensure that companies involved in CCUS are not claiming something which is not to be claimed and that there is no greenwashing somewhere? You are on mute.
Sorry, I will. For carbon removal, we have, I already mentioned it, a certification framework for carbon removal and carbon farming that is exactly looking at that from a supply perspective to make sure that when someone is claiming that he's doing 1 ton of removal, this is really 1 net ton of removal, and it accounts for all the emissions in a life cycle manner in the production of this removal. So this will be really something extremely important. I would like to react once again on CCU. I fully agree with Fabrice, but just to give an example where CCU could potentially be something very relevant in the future. The aviation sector. To decarbonize the aviation sector, you do not have thousands of options. You have 2 options basically, or you continue to use fossil fuel and you do you do carbon removal out of that to compensate for this, and it's not really decarbonizing the aviation sector, it's compensating for it. Or you use a new type of fuels, biofuels or e-fuels, and e-fuels is about CCU. And this is really interesting because if you want to be carbon neutral in the aviation sector, by using, you have to account for the CO2 emissions and the non-CO2 emissions in the aviation sector. You have contrails, for instance, that are emitting an average greenhouse gas impact. Greenhouse impact. It reflects, it contributes to climate change. And when you use CCU, you have much less particles that are emitted, and combusting in a plane CCU has much less non-CO2 effect than combusting in a plane fossil fuel CCU. So in this perspective, you could think that CCU could have potentially, for the same amount of carbon used instead of permanently stored to do carbon removal, even if it's more expensive, you could potentially have a more benefit of doing CCU from a climate benefit perspective than to do CCS. Of course, you have to look at that case by case, and it's just to give an example where it could also be very important to try to really assess in a very accurate way what are the climate impact of different solutions, being CCU or CCS. And I fully agree with Fabrice on everything that he said. I think compared to nature-based solutions for carbon removal in particular, here, what you have done in the past in the context of the ETS and everything, you are providing very accurate monitoring, reporting information. So I think the risk of the fear of greenwashing is a bit not as developed as for other type of action, and this is really an advantage of this kind of solution.
I agree what you say on planes, and well, I just want to precise. I don't mean that planting trees is bad. It's good.
No.
It's just
it's complementary.
on the point of metering, it's more difficult,
of course.
But it's very good.
Thank you, Olaf. How can industry association ensure that CCUS projects really contribute to emission reduction?
I think many aspects have already been mentioned by Fabrice and Fabien. I wanted to expand a bit on that. So as Fabrice said, the CCS is relatively straightforward, easy to trace the CO2 where it comes from, how much is emitted, how much is transported, and how much is stored. And then after it is stored, you monitor it to check that it's there, or to see if it's moving somewhere where it shouldn't be. When it comes to carbon capture and utilization, there are good uses of that. But as Fabrice said, both the climate impact and to see where the carbon goes is very, very difficult for a lot of projects. In particular, short-lived projects, be that in plastics or in other forms of chemicals, where they might be around for a couple of months, they might be around for a couple of years, but then in the end, many of them, if not most, will be incinerated in the end, or for organic carbon or other forms of substances might decompose. So it's likely that a lot of it will end up in the atmosphere again. Also, when it comes to fuels, for example, because the EU has several pieces of legislation that incentivizes production of synthetic carbon-based fuels, such as aviation fuels, for example, or for shipping for that matter. And one of the big problems with that is, of course, one is that they will be combusted, so the carbon will end up again in the atmosphere within a couple of months. The second is the large amount of electricity required to produce hydrogen in order to make these fuels. And when it comes to energy efficiency, then electrofuels are the exact opposite of efficiency, because of the large losses in the production, but also in the use of these fuels. And if you don't take this into account, we risk, as the European Union is doing that, to incentivize large-scale production of carbon-based synthetic fuels without sufficiently caring about whether we have enough, not only enough electricity, but enough renewable electricity to produce these fuels. And even if it's possible by way of power purchasing agreements or subsidies for this type of fuels, or various ways to fund substantial production of electrofuels in Europe, this, as long as renewable electricity is a scarce resource, which it will remain for many years, if not decades, in Europe today, then we risk incentivizing, for example, new gas power plants because of the increased electricity demand. Germany now plans to build new gas power plants. They do not plan to apply carbon capture and storage for them. They're saying they might use hydrogen instead of gas at some point in the future, which is also not a good idea, because it is an inefficient use of energy, such as hydrogen, and burn in our plant. So all of this makes it difficult to, as has been mentioned already, to say that CCU is a climate solution, even though it can some cases be a sensible use. Even though the vast majority of carbon that we capture in Europe today must be sent for permanent storage, so that it does not come back again into the atmosphere and heat the planet.
Thank you. This was very interesting discussion. I will skip the last question because lack of time, and we may have another opportunity to exchange. I have heard a lot of words coming from you three, the trust, transparency, price, how to say, reliability and public to be informed, fundings. These are important words to be kept in mind, and maybe this is the takeaway of this discussion. As a conclusion, I would like to finalize on a few words because the idea was to share with you your experience and to identify elements that we, TIC industry, we can also accompany with. Our motto in this case would be safeguarding the path to decarbonization every step of the way. This captures the essential role that we have, TIC industry. We are enabler of the success of this development, the project development, CCS and CCU, and we are partners to contributing to the reduction of the GHG emission in the world. We are there to act as an independent expert, verifier, certifier at every stage of a project. We help industry stakeholders. We discuss with the regulatory body. We listen to the different organizations that are involved to push or to slow down some action. And we are there to provide solutions to challenges, to ensure the authenticity and the safety and long-term viability of this project. We are not to be bypassed. We are an actor as much as you are. And I would like to really thank you, the three of you, so Fabrice, Olaf, and Fabien, for your presence, for sharing your very valuable insight. We invite the audience to join us in the Q&A session. It will be, let's say, limited in time, but do not hesitate to raise your question. I was honored to be the one to speak today with you. I hope we have provided insight and that you would be interested in learning more about what is CCUS and about the TIC Council white paper on this topic. Thank you very much to everyone. So, Leo, do we have any questions that have been raised?
I think at this point it's better that we just move to close the webinar because it's time. So what I would say is that any questions that anybody would like to raise after, please do send it to our secretary's email. We will forward them to the speakers, of course, and get back to you on it. But thank you very much, everybody, for joining. I join Muriel also in thanking Fabrice, Olaf, Fabian. Thank you so much for your time, and hope that we can have future experiences as well like this moving ahead.
Thank you. Thank you. And enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for the
Bye-bye.
organization. Bye.
Thank you.